All right, everybody. Welcome to the Doc Jacque Show. I got a very awesome guest here today. We got Quinten Williams, goes by Q. So what does he do? He's a men's coach for current and retired athletes, bringing clarity, brotherhood, and accountability to men's deepest missions after sports. So he's also the creator of the world-class method, and he's also a leading authority in a male athlete mental wellness. Q is a two-sport athlete at Northwestern, playing some football there. He held a master's degree in sports management and was a Gator Bowl champion. After sport, he overcame years of post-concussion syndrome and leveraging his own world-class method. He went from feeling confused and angry about concussions to feeling lit up, clear-eyed, and committed to thriving in a world, making a world-class impact on athletes. Q has spoken in countless podcasts, obviously this one, facilitated international men's groups, filled venues for live events across San Diego County, and he serves as an official provider for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, behavioral health, and founder of World Class, where he supports clients via one-on-one coaching, group courses, and speaking. So as you could tell, football background, I am so excited to have him on the show here today. So let's get into it. All right, everybody. So we have Q on today. So again, you heard in the intro, he's well vetted. We were just chatting back and forth about football, playing in college, and then just our history of tending to hit our heads maybe a little bit more frequently than we should have. But Q, welcome to the show, man.
So great to be here, Jacque. I'm really pumped to connect on this on all levels, man.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, he does a lot of work with like post-concussive therapy. He has a ton of programs, different archetype quizzes and things out there. You work with the NFL Hall of Fame as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm a partner with the NFL Hall of Fame Behavioral Health.
Yeah.
As well as a nonprofit called Athlete Soul. I'm on the board out here, a local San Diego concussion profit called Beyond Concussion. Yeah, several organizations.
Awesome. And I know that you told me, but what kind of really made you pour into this in terms of hey, this is my passion, this is where I'm going to go, and this is how I'm going to run with it?
Yeah, well, so like you, as a college athlete, I played football and baseball and got my bell rung a number of times. Plenty of undiagnosed concussions, I'm sure, now that we know more about concussion. But I played since I was 7, and we had a drill that was basically testing how many times you could hit each other in the head to head. Throughout practice over an hour-long span. So I'm no stranger to head contact. And when I was in my master's program at Northwestern, my senior year, I was studying sports management and learned about the concussion problem back in 2012, before there was really much talk about this at all. We were barely even being taught much at the college level while we were playing about the risks. Yeah. And, fast forward now 10 years, there's so much more that we know about the brain. There's still so much more to evolve. And, at that point in my life, I wasn't quite ready to go into entrepreneurship and start my own thing. There were a lot of insecurities that I had in myself. And I felt like I needed to, cross X, Y, and Z box before I could really do that. And, long story short, I fast forward through a 6-year corporate career, 1-year startup career in the concussion world. And then before finally starting something of my own. And what was interesting was I was having my own post-concussion syndrome battles myself. And so this topic that I was really passionate about, this is messed up. I got to get more information out there for guys. I want to try and solve this problem. Turns out I was solving my own problem too. And when I finally started solving my own problems, when it came to my moodiness and my frustration and my anxiety, my headaches, my nausea, all the different symptoms I had from post-concussion syndrome, I started to realize, I actually have some solutions here. I have some things to really offer. And my experience can be turned from pain into purpose. Just like that, wouldn't you know, as I shifted my mindset from procrastination, really focused on the ego and how am I going to look, to how can I serve? How can I step up and, step into my wheelhouse? And as I did that, it was night and day. My symptoms got better. I felt better. And my doctors noticed too. It was fascinating to watch, go into my optometrist's office one week and then the next week. And he's like, I don't know how your eyes have gotten better, but you are it's like you're back to normal. And I was like, yeah, I feel back to normal because I don't know. I'm just looking at things differently, quite literally. So, through my own experience and then just a passion for this space and passion for guys getting lit up about life beyond sports and not falling into the pattern of like, I'm a washed up athlete or my best days are behind me, those sorts of like self-talk. I'm like, let's nix that. Let's go after something bigger. You're prepared for like real leadership beyond sport because you played sports. So let's go do it,
Yeah. That's one of the things too, where, if the people listening, they probably know my backstory. I told you before we hopped on here, I had concussions in college, and to me, like, they were highlight reel hits, right? Like, I was a linebacker. So I was taught in high school 2 things. One, both are hilarious. One, water makes you weak. That's how old school my coach was. And then tackle with the crown in your head. Just boom, just go after it. Because then you light people up. You have a higher chance of fumble, recovery, etc. And so, we wanted those highlight reel hits, and that was like bragging rights. Like every time you get a big hit, you're like, yeah. And then I always remember too, and I tell Megan this, my wife, I'm like, I don't know why coaches smack their athletes on the top of the head, like after they do a good play. Cause like, I remember that where I would tackle with my head and my head would be kind of tingling for a minute, and then whap, you'd smack it on top. I'm like, I didn't need that. So, going through that and then having my subdural hematoma, the brain trauma, spinal trauma, all that stuff into paralysis into where we're at now, what I found is something that you said is, every time that we have like these accidents happen, there's a lesson to be learned in each accident. You can do one or two things. You can just sit there and kind of lick your wounds and go into victim mode, or you can step into your purpose, like you said, and say, okay, I'm not the only one suffering with this. That is my bottom line. That is my rock bottom. I'm never going back there. And I'm going to bring more people from there to where I am now, doing something that most people don't even know is possible, post-injury and post-athletics, which is huge, right?
Yeah. We're in the same lane. We're doing the same kind of work.
You have to. I mean, especially for men nowadays, because there's so many issues. And I'm sure that you've run into this too, where like if you have certain head injuries, it could do a couple things. Concussions lead to leaky gut almost instantaneously, leaky gut, leaky brain. And then the other thing is the more head trauma that you have, you start to scar over your pituitary gland. You can get a benign tumor in there too, which would then decrease men's testosterone, growth hormone. And we go from these big athletes and these little itty bitty guys, and we don't understand why. And it's because we've just been smashing our heads against a wall, almost literally, while we were playing sports.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's pretty wild. Maybe we can even touch today on like some of the things you would recommend as a naturopathic physician for like brain health. Like I've taught on this through my own experience because I've seen everyone from gut specialists to chiropractic to PT to vision therapy. I've seen the whole gambit, and I picked up a few tricks in my toolkit. But I the science is always changing, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're always learning more, and yesterday's news is old news sometimes. But yeah, I've found that some basics really help me as far as my brain health and just my mindset. And we can talk more about it. But I think like I do ice tubs in the morning, for instance. I do breath work, which helps circulate this cerebral spinal fluid, helps me clean my brain, activate my lymph nodes in different ways to, increase, toxic discharge and stuff. So I love to kind of geek out on that stuff too.
Yeah, no, yes, we're cut from the same fabric for sure. Yeah. So when it comes to the CTEs and stuff, we could dive into some of the other fun stuff there as well. But when it comes to the CTEs, as a parent now, like my son's, he's not going to play any axial loading sports. Like to me, like soccer and football, like those, I know that it can take years off the end of your lifespan due to concussive injuries. And actually racket sports, pinball, ping pong, tennis and stuff can actually increase your chance of survival and things. Yeah, it's it increases brain-derived growth factor. Yep. And so those types of things, and long distance running can potentially do that too. Now, I'm not ever going to do long distance running because I'm not cut from that. Like I'll do sprints and hit training all day, but not that. So when it comes to like the CTEs, what would you tell parents to watch out for? What would you tell even athletes? If you had a group of college players in front of you, what would you say to watch out for whenever it comes to concussions, both signs and symptoms?
Yeah. So number one is something I'll say that is actually one of the biggest controversies right now when it comes to athletes and taking care of themselves. We see so many examples. You could throw Irving in there. You could throw Simone Biles in there. You can throw all the Olympic athletes that have, talked about their own mental health. I think like the biggest issue that a lot of athletes are facing right now is, where do I draw the line between taking care of myself and taking care of the team? Doing what is like, quote unquote, best for the team. Is it to stay in the game, or is it to get out if I feel like, I'm going to have long-term consequences from whatever just happened?
Yeah.
Because that was my experience. Like when I go back to when that big hit happened, there was nothing unique about that hit. It was on a special teams play where a lot of concussions happen, but I had done millions of those. And for whatever reason, I was seeing double running down the field for about 2 minutes. I was able to finish the play, but I did not realize at the time that I was concussed. I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, this isn't normal. I should probably have a look at this and maybe come off the field. But then I also thought to myself, we're beating Michigan right now. It's the first time I've ever been beating Michigan in the big house. And it's my senior year, and there's 2 freshmen that are backing me up.
Yeah.
And I'm worried if I come out, we're going to lose. And it'll be because I came out potentially, right?
Yeah.
Such an egotistical thing to think, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in that frame of mind, like you're like, I want to be the guy. I don't want to come out and then have someone else take my place. I don't want them to outperform me. And I think every athlete has those thoughts. I think I'm not immune to that. No one is. I like to think I'm a team player, but where do you draw the line of coming out of the game, taking care of yourself, and helping out your own ego, helping out the team? And so in that situation, it was up to me. There were support staff that could have maybe spotted that I was kind of running down the field a little wobbly, but I mean, I did a pretty good job playing it off. It's really hard to spot a concussion, really hard, unless you fall unconscious, which is, I think 10 or 20% of concussions are unconscious. Most of the concussions are from just smaller hits, smaller kind of subconcussive hits, where you feel a little nauseous, feel a little headache, feel stars, or any one of those symptoms. If you just experience one, you are technically concussed. I think number one is really educating the athlete themselves on what their priorities should be, right? What the long-term consequences are if you don't come out of the game. You don't take yourself out, put yourself first. Because really the team isn't going to be at their best if they don't have you, long-term, right? And you're going to regret that. Like I sometimes do. Like I wish I would have came out of that game. Part of me is like happy I stayed in, but like, 10 years of working through post-concussion syndrome it's just not fun. Yeah. It's a very confusing time. So to get back to your question, what would I advise parents to do? It's definitely educate the athletes themselves, and then also really look out for coaches and the kind of culture that they're breeding. Mm-hmm. Is it win at all costs culture? Is it tough it up, stuff it down culture? Are they modeling that, or are they just talking it, right? I think that unfortunately, like I too probably won't let my kids play, sports at that level, especially contact sports until they're a little bit older. I'd rather have a little more control in that situation. There's a lot of bad coaches.
Oh God, yeah.
And I think if I'm letting my kid play at that young, I'm probably one of the coaches.
Yeah. Or at least on the sidelines, real close to the coaches.
Yeah. Because there's still that same form that's taught. Lead with the crown, right? Mm-hmm. I'd rather my kid play rugby than American football, right? And rugby's not much better. But
but think about that though. Like I've said this actually since I went to chiropractic school at Life University had one of the top rugby programs, and like you'd watch and like, ooh man, but they didn't have helmets on, so they rarely led with their heads on a tackle, and their form tackles were like amazing. They'd wrap up, boom, bring them down to the ground, and the injuries were far less there. When you're in a scrum, sometimes you use your head to like kind of to gouge in there. But for the most part, I was like, if you want to eliminate concussions in football, go back to the leather helmets or no helmets at all. And people think I'm crazy, but like that will stop people from hitting their heads. It'll stop.
You're not. And another big misconception is it's very likely that my post-concussion syndrome came from me not addressing that concussion, that big hit, that big impact in the moment, and it haunted me for years.
Sure.
Another way that, head injury can haunt you for years is the link between the subconcussive hits, the added additional, like all the little ones, right? Yeah. When you have a helmet on and you're using it, kind of like driving faster when you have a seatbelt on, you're going to hit your head against people more often if you have something protecting it.
Yeah.
And so it's all those little ones that they're now saying is associated with like CTE and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the degenerative disease of the brain. So it's two sides of the same coin, right? You want to address the big hits. I would say that probably, going to leather helmets would help that, but it would definitely help even more the smaller ones that lead to like the quote unquote CTE. So, it's both. I totally agree with you. And I think that Pete Carroll, for instance, at the Seahawks has, he basically came up with rugby tackling. He calls it hawk tackling, where he teaches the complete opposite of what we were taught growing up and how to tackle. So he leads with the shoulder instead of the head. So it's almost like it's completely backwards, but it works and it's really effective and it keeps the head out of it.
Yeah. So, well, clearly works. I mean, their defense is pretty,
lights out.
It's good.
Yeah.
But I've heard, and you kind of brought this up, but I just wanted to see your take on this. Cause I've had athletes that I've played with where they're like, coach says I can only get one more concussion or else I can't play anymore. What is your thought of that? When a coach is like, hey, you could only get like 5 concussions or something, how do you feel that most athletes respond to that cap, if you will?
That's a really good question. I've never experienced that. I've experienced a doctor like saying that, for instance. Like I have friends that, were on like their 5th or 6th concussion. And it was like, if you get another one, like you'd have to be out or you got to come out now because, if you had one more, it would be a lot worse than this last one because they do get worse. Every concussion you have, statistically speaking, they do get worse. You're more susceptible to another concussion, which is why you come out and you try to heal it as much as possible. It's the same thing as like an ankle injury. Once you've, twisted your ankle once, you're so much more likely to twist it again. So that kind of hit count on concussion makes total sense because the more you have, the worse it can get.
When we're talking about like the allotment of the concussions, I feel like it could go a couple different ways. And I mean, once we leave the sport as athletes, I feel it's very difficult you could take the athlete out of the sport, but you can't take the sport out of the athlete. So like our mindset, it would be, if my coach said, hey, buddy, or your doc was like, hey, you only got 5 concussions that you can take or whatever the reasoning behind it is, only 5. I would be far less likely to tell the coach or tell the doctor that I got another concussion for fear of what you said, being taken out and then hurting my team and not being a team player in that type of instance. So I feel like it could be beneficial. And I feel like, when people say like, hey, there's a limitation on concussions, like one concussion is too many concussions, in my opinion. And like you said, each of those little micro concussions lead to massive damage, and it's a snowball effect. And it's even like the subclinical ones where they don't elicit those symptoms quite yet, that all of a sudden, like you said, just boom, you get your bell rung once, and it's just the culmination of every time you've been hit. Boom. Yeah. Now you feel it, and I feel like, because I'm from Pittsburgh, like Antonio Brown. Like I think about Antonio Brown when he got hit by Perfect. And he has never been the same since. And everyone's judging him and all that stuff. I'm like, guys, like this is something up here. Like when he got that hit, if you go back and you watch that video, it was one of the most disgusting hits. Like I'm just like sick to my stomach even thinking about how hard that would be. Because I mean, force equals mass times acceleration. Perfect was a huge, fast individual, and Antonio Brown was teeny tiny and super fast. And you collide those two forces, and all of that went into Brown's head. And so it's important as parents, as coaches, or as health professionals or health providers, like we really need to take this into consideration, because this isn't just for like that short-term win. I mean, very few people go off into, into the NFL. The percentage is so minor. So you're accumulating all these injuries for what? For your own ego the majority of the time. And then you sacrifice the rest of your life due to you wanting to play that sport. And it can tear up. Like I've seen people with CTEs. He was a patient of mine. He was actually a dear friend of mine. He was a parent of one of my neighbors. There's a lot that went into it, but he got T-boned by a Mack truck and was never the same since. And he would medicate himself with pain pills, which is usually like, we'll talk about that, but that's usually like where people will go is like, hey, my head won't stop ringing. What can I do? Just take some opioids. He got addicted to that, had some alcohol issues, and ended up taking his life because he couldn't handle being that type of version he was. So like that was something he didn't choose, but it still kind of is the same thing. You get that concussion, you get that brain trauma. You do the same thing when you're playing sports. I feel like it's really important that, we address that as a whole, because again, you fix it now and address it now, or you wait for that problem to fester. And I'm a big believer of nothing ever gets better through neglect. So we have to be smart, because it's our brains. Our brains control everything in our body. If we don't have this working up here, the rest of our lives is just going to be continuously trending downward.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things, I actually faced this when I was working for a concussion management startup out of college. I was trying to teach people that they needed to pay attention to concussion and they needed to get a baseline test.
Yes.
But a lot of athletes and parents and coaches were looking at that as like, that's kind of like an insurance policy that I don't really need, Yeah. And, I had to do a lot of educating around that about, yeah, it's an insurance policy, but it's kind of one that you need, it's something that's going to be required soon, actually, at the youth level. And I think it might be at this point, but, why not be the leader in this space? And I think that also goes into how we approach health. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't really think too far in advance. CTE is actually interesting because it's very much like Alzheimer's, where you can't really, there's not many treatments. You can't really cure Alzheimer's. You can slow it down, right, once you have it, at least from my knowledge. But you can't, so the only thing you can really do is try to prevent it. Yeah. And when you look at trying to prevent Alzheimer's, it's actually pretty similar to how you would prevent CTE, aside from the head trauma component, right? It really comes down to your level of happiness, your level of fulfillment, your level of passion for the things that you do. Really just having a really balanced life wheel. I call it a life scoreboard. Are things balanced in your life? Do you feel like you have that harmony? And, typically if you found that harmony, you're avoiding Alzheimer's and you're also avoiding, well, it's at least my theory that you're also avoiding CTE in the long term.
So, and I mean, compared to the normal medical or standard medical treatment, what does your avenue look like? If somebody's coming to you and they wanted to work with you for a CTE, what does that look like, especially compared to normal medical?
I don't market myself as a CT expert, but I obviously have my own experience from post-concussion syndrome. I know a lot about this topic, a lot that has gone unaddressed, a lot that's kind of under the radar, but I'm not a medical expert and I'm not a medical provider. I'm a mindset coach. I focus on the intangibles, right? And I found in my experience that has really supported me through my journey through the kind of CTE confusion and post-concussion syndrome. So my approach is foundational around a few pillars. I approach it from approaching it from that life wheel perspective. But my 5 pillars are knowing who you are without your sport, and just knowing who you are as a man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. And, a lot of athletes are still kind of operating from that has been or wish I could have been, and kind of have their identity locked up in sport still. And so, relinquishing that, pulling your identity out of that, your core identity that's been there since way before sport, leading with that, knowing where you're at and knowing where you want to go. The second step is really, clearing out the fog for a clear vision on where you're looking to set out to, what you want out of life, what you want that to look like. And then usually that's professionally for a lot of guys, right? It's usually especially for masculine men, purpose is so important, right? Freedom is so important. So a lot of my clients end up being entrepreneurs, which is cool. So I can support them along that journey and really own up to all of the, all the societal standards that sometimes get in the way, all of the trash talk, the criticism, the doubtfulness that we have in ourselves, all the limiting beliefs that we have as men that everyone has, and learning how to quiet those. I believe to really get through those things, it takes relationships. So I focus a lot on emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and how to create, loving and, win-win relationships in the world, because that's really how you get a mission to get done. You don't do it in a vacuum. You bring people into the fold. So I believe that leading with our emotional experiences is paramount. And then it really comes down to like really taking action, like being bold about your actions and the habits that you have on a daily basis. So I provide a lot of accountability towards getting uncomfortable constantly, starting your day with discomfort, and approaching the kind of the proverbial frog of the day, first, and setting that tone for uncomfortable action.
So you mentioned, well, all that is really great. You mentioned one thing that I actually had a patient talk about today, so I want to dive in a little bit more. The societal standards for a guy and the criticism and all that stuff that it feels like the average person, it just feels like they're under the thumb of society. What are the typical things that you see are like those the beliefs that most men have that are just not true or should not be true?
There's a lot of them, man. That's a great question. We could probably do a whole podcast episode on this topic.
Yeah.
Because especially athletes are really caught up in the idea that they're only worthy of rest. They're only worthy of success. They're only worthy of affection and love and being able to rest their head at night if they've gone out and they've completely left it all on the field and they've done everything they could, right?
Mm-hmm.
Such a big, deep focus on doing and always being busy. And I think a lot of athletes and men addicted to always being on and really in our sympathetic nervous system. And it runs a toll on guys' nervous systems. And if you actually want to look bigger picture at it, those are a lot of the same symptoms of concussion, right? Is like, the fatigue, the moodiness, it's all very related to your nervous system and how that's operating, right?
There's a ton of different beliefs. Limiting beliefs. That's what I was trying to come up. There's tons of limiting beliefs that are out there that men fall under. And a lot of them, especially like post athletes or even entrepreneurs, especially, they have the fear of failure, and that fear of failure is a strong motivator for them. And it's always been that way. It's always been ingrained in them. And, I know that was something like as I was growing up, my self-worth that I thought I was being judged at was how good I was at sports. And if I wasn't good at baseball or I wasn't good at football, then my dad would think less of me in those instances, even to the point where like my nickname was Skinny. Like I was 116 pounds my freshman year, 6'1", 116, like a teeny tiny guy with the name Jacque. So I got bullied a lot. And then my dad throwing the
super skinny. Wow. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was a string bean, man. I'm a natural ectomorph. So I'm like super tiny if I don't work hard, which my wife hates me for because I'll get a 6-pack if I just like avoid sugar for like a week or carbs for a week. But anyways,
I love it.
So it's that mindset where I was constantly chasing that approval. And I think that carries over now, or it did carry over in my business where I'm like, I constantly want to keep growing and growing and growing. And then I throw out these crazy expectations of where I want to be in business growth. And I'm like, whoa, time out for a second. Like there's a time to do, and then there's a time to be. And that being is where you do start to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. And from a health standpoint too, and I don't know if you knew this, there was a guy, his name's, actually his book should be here somewhere. Yeah. Nutrition in the Autonomic Nervous System. I don't know if it's backwards or not. Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. Dude, like, so I used to do a lot of work with cancer patients and stuff. And so his theory and his philosophy was that if you had a nervous system that was sympathetic dominant, you develop solid tumors, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. And then if you had a parasympathetic dominant nervous system, you develop the the cancers, leukemias, like those types of things, multiple myelomas. So Super interesting. And again, tying into like the concussions and having that constant overstimulation. That's why we see, the most common types of cancers are the solid tumors. And it's because society today is so goal driven and oriented that people forget to be in the moment and appreciate what they have. And they don't operate out of a sense of gratitude, which is really sad to see.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I talked about earlier, like where a lot of athletes are kind of stuck in like, oh, should have been, could have been, would have been. Yeah. And constantly guilting themselves and shooting themselves as if, they're not living up to their potential. When really, if they could actually take some space to sit in the pause, to sit in that space, cultivate who they really are, remember that, and remember that no one can take that from them no matter what, right? Then you do start to balance out and feel into that, and all the doing becomes easier. When you're living authentically, all the doing just becomes happenstance, it just happens naturally and life just flows, right? That's really the flow state that we're all looking for, is a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic, Sure. We're not supposed to just sit in a cave all day, and we're also not supposed to be slaving at work all day, but we're supposed to have that balance. When we look at our football careers, that was not sustainable all our life, right?
No.
That was not sustainable. We're not supposed to do that all of our life. That there are the David Goggins of the world that'll probably be running ultra marathons until he's dead, right?
Yeah.
But I'm the kind of person that takes things with a grain of salt. I think David is great, but that's not the kind of life I want to live. No. I want to have balance, and I think we all do, right? So yeah, that's a really good point. I think balancing doing and being. I talk about this a lot. And the comparison I like to make is, someone who's focused on doing will often work really hard, whereas someone that can tap into their being, they often work a little smarter, and they end up getting a lot more done with a lot less effort. And if you like money, look at all the billionaires out there. They're doing a lot more with a lot less effort, typically, because they prioritize the things that really light them up, the things that get them into their being.
So talk about, because I know that you have the Life After Athlete Archetype quiz. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, for sure. After sports, I think that all athletes kind of run up against two big things. And it's this idea of like taking over responsibility and then having opportunities. Like, how do you respond when you have responsibility put in your corner? And then how do you respond when you have opportunity put in your corner? I'll fast forward. Everyone on a field, athletes on a football field, for instance, there's always 4 captains on almost every team. There are always these leaders from all around the field. You might have a kicker, you might have the quarterback, the linebacker, the defensive end, the offensive lineman, right? Who gets no credit at all.
Yeah.
And if you look at those categories, they're leading from all parts of the field, but they're leaders in different rights, right? And there's a different personality that comes with each of them. And I believe in the real world that everyone can be a team captain in their own right. And they can apply that same rule, right? That same kind of archetype from sport into the real world, and lead from the front, the back, the side, wherever the world needs them. Yeah. And I give, so based on a few questions that I'll ask in this like short little quiz, the Athlete Archetype quiz, that'll spit out an answer for basically where you lie and where you're best, suited when it comes to life beyond sport and what your archetype is. That's the inspiration behind the Athlete Archetype quiz.
I love it. Because I think it's like an exit interview, like you're getting done and like, okay, now how do I carry out all those things that I've learned over here? How do I bring that into real life? And so I think it's a really great transition between, collegiate life or sport life into that. So I'm really glad that you're doing that. And I hope that everyone listening will go and like take that quiz or do that quiz with you. So that way they can see, if they have been an athlete and then like if somebody has already been out 10, 15 years or so, are they able to still go back, take the archetype quiz and see if they're fulfilling how they should have been? Yeah. Because that's
totally. It'll inform you no matter what, because I think we all, I think we all subconsciously kind of want to be taken back to that place, that place where we feel like we're operating at our best. And that's usually, on the field or in the pool or wherever it was for us. So a nice reminder of what that felt like and what it was like, I think is always helpful. And the tools I'll give you, after you finish the quiz, I'll give you a bunch of strategies to use, ways to, adjust your habits, ways to adjust the way you operate to really optimize your archetype. So yeah, it's good for all levels. And most of my programming today, actually, what I'm launching right now, what I'm in the middle of, is doing a second launch of my Wheelhouse program. So that's for retired athletes that have been out for several years, and it's for men only that want to get back into their wheelhouse. They want to really, alchemize that athlete archetype in the real world and take it a step further. So if you take the archetype quiz and that intrigues you, check out Wheelhouse. Cool. And I can drop those two links in the show notes, I'm sure. So athletearchetype.com is the quiz, and then wheelhouse12.com is Wheelhouse, the program.
Awesome. So I know we're going to be wrapping it up here because we have to, unfortunately, but I want to go through. So you talked about how you cryo yourself in the morning. So that morning stimulation, what does your day typically look like? Like what do you prioritize in your day?
Yeah. Well, first thing I do is I prioritize myself. I get up in the morning. If I can fill my cup, I can then fill up everybody else's, right?
Thank you for saying that. Yes.
Yeah. And I think preparation starts the night before. So just like you're used to as an athlete, like you're playing usually on Saturdays on Thursday night sleep. It's not Friday night sleep. It's not Saturday morning's breakfast. You're playing on all the preparation that went into it days before. So my nighttime routine is pretty intense. Well, it's not intense, but it's very intentional. Like I wind down. I spend at least about an hour without screens. I try to have good sleep hygiene. Recently, I've been off social media a few hours before bed, even for business, right? I do chamomile tea at night, and then I'll wake up, try to wake up at the same time, no matter whether it's a weekday or a weekend, and take those first few hours in the morning when it's really quiet and usually dark to myself. And recently I've been praying, because I realized that prayer, whether you're a Christian or anyone or not, the framework for prayer actually is like the perfect morning routine. If you want to get in like all the gratitude, all the visualization, all of the meditation, everything, just try prayer. It's really interesting. Yeah. So it starts with, being grateful for what you have and thanking, the world, the gods, right? Whatever it is. Some stillness, listening and trying to tap into what's real, what's present. So some meditation, then going into, tracking down like what's not working with the way I'm operating. So I at least, figure out what's not working right now. And I basically confess that to myself. And I say, procrastination was not working yesterday. It's not serving me. I let go of that right now. And then I step into, what am I trying to manifest for people out there? What do I wish for them? What do I visualize for the world? And then what do I visualize for myself? And I try to really lock that in and visualize, what I want the world, God to bring me. And then, I think, I give thanks. And it's just, it's totally shifted things for me. It's like, I don't have to go and spend like an hour doing breath work and then gratitude journal and then spend 20 minutes visualizing and do this Joe Dispenza meditation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're a guy that's just getting into mindfulness and having a morning routine, look up that formula for prayer, whether you're religious or not. It's really simple, and it's a great foundation to get my day started.
Well, it's a great way too. And it sounds like it's kind of a non-negotiable for you as well, which is awesome. Yeah. But when you're in that grateful state or that state of gratitude and loving and being thankful, you tend to manifest a lot more and a lot more positivity, a lot more amazing things just are like magnetized to you. Yeah. And when you do that and you're active and your intention and you're intentional behind it, it's almost kind of easy. And it's like, why would I not do that? Like, it's such a good tool that is so underutilized. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm really glad that you said that.
Yeah, it's foundational. And like the word gratitude, like I used to get kind of queasy when people say gratitude, kind of like when they would say mindfulness or conscious or those kind of buzzwords, right?
Yep.
Because they're so overplayed. But really, like, gratitude is actually exactly what we talked about a minute ago. It's being. It's actually tapping into like what is present, not what do I have to go do, but what is present? Like what is real right now? What can I notice? What can I pull out that's positive? And how can that support me in all the doing, like just naturally? Because you're right. When you're grateful, when you're thankful for what is present, you literally call in. Like it's like everything just naturally flows. You start to notice more opportunities because you're paying attention to the positive. You're paying attention to the opportunity, not the limitations, So it's a great way to start the day.
Awesome. And then I know that you talked about the Archetype quiz and
Wheelhouse.
Where else can people reach out and find you?
Instagram's a great tool. I'm also on TikTok, but so a whole host. But I would say Instagram's probably the best. You can DM me on there. My name there is Q Willliams _. Probably link that as well. Yeah, reach directly out to me if you have questions. I would love to see what your results are too. So tag me on IG when you get your results. There's a downloadable little IG story that'll show you your results, and you can share it with all your friends and tag me on that because I want to see what people's reactions are to their archetypes.
Yeah, and I'll do that quiz as well because I haven't done that yet. So I'll do that with a tag on it, and I'll have them put everything in the show notes for us so that way people can reach out to you. But again, man, thank you so much for being on, talking about this athlete to athlete and mindset to mindset. Like we vibe on so many different frequencies. I'm just grateful to have you on, man. So thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, Jacque. This has been a blast, man.